Christmas on the romantic road, a week of adventure in southern Germany. We left our hotel in Lisbon and were at the airport early, but only to discover that our booking somehow got lost. And so they had to rebook us on another flight with Lufthansa to Frankfurt and then to Germany. But it meant wasting a lot of hours sitting around in the Lisbon airport before we finally could take off on our German adventure. The following animated flight route shows you how we flew from Lisbon through Spain, through France, and into Germany, and finally to Nuremberg. And then after we picked up our luggage and arranged for transportation, we were on our way to Maxstrasse 44 in Fürth, a house that we had rented for our stay. Now, two couples had actually gone earlier on different flights and were there already. Now, here in this photo, to the left, you have the train station and subway station. And then in the top left corner, you have the beginnings of Maxstrasse, where our house is found. It's very central to the old city, but even more important, there was a supermarket very close to our house. Unfortunately, the house did not have elevators, and there were long flights of stairs up, so we got plenty of exercise going to the first, second, and third floor of the house. Now, the next day, we were ready to explore Fürth, and the first thing was to take a group photo at a fountain in front of the railroad station. From there we went to the tourist bureau of the German railroad to buy all our tickets that we needed for our various trips and excursions during the week. And after that we were ready to explore, and the first stop was the house where I grew up in, Blumenstraße 25, which you see here. And we lived on the third floor. The house is pretty much the same as it was, except for the ground floor. We went from there to Gustavstrasse and saw the narrow roads, but especially the slate-covered houses, which is a hallmark of Fürth. It was already late by that time, and we had walked quite a bit, and we were hungry, and we started looking for a restaurant in the area for lunch. And we found this one, and actually Joey and I had been in there for lunch about 2 years previous, more or less at the same time. And so we went there, and the beer was still good, as you can see in the next picture. And so was the food. And we were surprised because the cook was able to dish up international dishes of a good taste. And so we had a good lunch, and afterwards we went back to our apartment, to our house, and then went out once more to shop for dinner. And we went first of all to the market, where you have a lot of fresh produce and a lot of fruit. And as you can see here in the first picture, and then you see the fruit stall here, where you get everything from around Europe and around the world. We also went to the supermarket close by and bought everything we needed for goulash soup and then for sauerkraut and smoked pork and sausages. We discovered we had excellent cooks in our group, and not only were they great dinner cooks, but also fabulous short order cooks for breakfast. And some of the best dinners and some of the best breakfast we had in that house, served by our two chefs here. Next day, on Tuesday, we went for our first sightseeing trip to Nuremberg. And here we are in a subway. We got off at St. Lawrence, which St. Lawrence Church is the largest church of Nuremberg. It's today a Lutheran church, although it started out as a Catholic one. And here is an image of the facade. During World War II, this church had been nearly totally destroyed. Luckily, the art treasures of it had been removed and were kept safe. And one of the most precious in the cathedral is really the Annunciation that is suspended over the sanctuary. But here first a shot looking back to the rose window and the main entrance of the church. Of Gabriel to Our Lady. It was a carving done by Veit Stoß, one of the great Renaissance artists of Germany. Another treasure is the Blessed Sacrament house, which is part of it which you see here, and it actually goes all the way up to the ceiling of the church. And you will see that in the next slide. Now, the artist of the Sacrament house had also a good sense of humor, because he put himself into his construction as carrying the whole house on his shoulders, as we see in the next slide in greater detail. And there he is, having the Blessed Sacrament house on his shoulders. Adam Kraft of Germany. And after we had, explored the church, we left and went out to Königstraße and made our way down to the main market. And we passed this little monument of the Ship of Fools. And when we arrived in the market is a square, and on the right side of it, you find this church, the Church of Our Lady, a Catholic church that started out as a synagogue, and you can still see the Star of David in the floor of the sanctuary of the church. It also houses this beautiful wood-carved statue of Our Lady of Sorrows with her dead son in her lap. Now, in front of the church, for decoration at Christmas time, they have real large spruce trees, but without any decoration on them. And in the market, in front of it, of course, it's devoted to the Christmas market. But we rushed first to this restaurant called Bratwurstglöckle. It goes back to the 14th century. And you have to be early because otherwise you don't get any place. And here is our crowd, happy with beer and ready for the main course. Here's a bread basket, and the rolls were excellent, but even better were the pretzels. And there's only one left in the basket, as you see, because the waiters couldn't bring them fast enough for us. And then they brought us the star attraction, which you see here, Nürnberger sausages with sauerkraut. And what you see there on the plate is just good enough for one person with kind of like a little bit of an appetite. The sausages are not very big, and they are delicious, and they seem to eat themselves, and that with beer is excellent. Now, next to the sausage place is this church of Saint Sebaldus, who was an 8th century hermit. The church today, too, is a Protestant church, although it started out as a Catholic one. Luckily, the decorations have not been removed, as you can see here, the various statues at the columns and the main nave of the church. One of the treasures housed here is the reliquary of Saint Sebaldus. And you see it here. It's a wonderful work, masterwork in brass, and the reliquary is gilded in the form of a church inside this structure, but you cannot really see it. We went back to the market from Sebaldus Church and saw this little tourist train for those who have a little difficulty walking around. And here is a partial image of the beautiful fountain, a hallmark of the marketplace of Nuremberg, but the booth of the Christmas market made it impossible for us to get a good shot that would show the whole thing. The next day, actually we went back to our house, had dinner there and celebrated Mass there, but the next day we were at the Fürth Railroad Station for our first trip to Bamberg. And here you have a train like the one we rode, and Bamberg is to the north about 70 kilometers, and it takes about a little bit less than 45 minutes to get there by train. And here is the animated flight travel route, and you can again see the red line going nearly straight north from Fürth to Bamberg. Now the first goal of our pilgrimage was the cathedral, which you see here. It goes back to the 12th century, to the time of Emperor Henry II of Germany and his wife Kunigund, both canonized saints of the Catholic Church and buried in the cathedral. Here is an inside shot of the cathedral. Here is a side altar, and what is interesting about it is that it has like doors on the side which can be closed, and there are pictures on the back side as well, so when you close it you really present a different scene from the public life of our Lord, so that the altar makes it possible to depict different scenes from the liturgical year. Here is the tomb of the emperor and his wife in front of the high altar, done by the workshop of Riemenschneider, one of the main artists of the Renaissance. Here is the so-called Bamberg rider. Nobody knows who did it, and nobody knows whom the figure on the horse represents, and it is one of the mysteries found in the church. After that we went on to the Dominikanergasse, the second point of our pilgrimage, a place called Schlenkerla, which is both brewery and restaurant, and makes one of the best smoked beers of Bamberg, a beer that you can only get there. And here it is. And I took a sip, and I can only say excellent, and say I wish you were here and tasted it, Pascal. And here are the participants. First of all, here is the menu, and it didn't take us long to order the first item, which was of course a glass of smoked beer for each and every one of us. And with that in hand, we were quite content to wait for the main course. Here you see part of our group with beer. And of course, what people order is Schweinshaxen, which is pig's knuckles, or sausages most often. But there is another delicacy in this area which is far better, which I'll describe in a moment. But here again, how happy we are with our glasses of beer. Now, the other thing is really called a Scheufele. And a Scheufele is a small shovel. And it's the shoulder roast of pork with crackling skin on top, served here with sauerkraut and dumplings. And there's only one thing that's better than a Scheufele and a glass of beer, and it is a second Scheufele and a glass of beer, as you see here. Now, once we had our food and a certain air of contentment came into our group, and you can see that when you see the group with their half empty or empty plates and their satisfied faces. Here, the ladies, and then in the following shot, the gentlemen. Of course, after this meal and after all these calories, we needed exercise. And so we continued on our way to the old city, and we walked to the old town hall, which is built on an artificial island in the middle of the Main River. It no longer functions as a town hall today, but houses the city museum. And here is the second shot of the same old town hall. From there, we slowly walked back to the bus station in the center of town and took the bus back to the train station and back home to Fürth. In the evening we had Mass, and then the next morning we were ready to take the train to Regensburg, which the animated route map will show you goes to the south and to the east of Nuremberg. It was the coldest day of that whole week. We started out at -4 degrees, but later on it warmed up to -2. We walked from the train station to the old city, and the first thing we visited was the old chapel, and it's there where the tower is in the background. And so we walked down this road and then entered it to the right. Now, chapel here doesn't mean a small place, and it is really an exuberant celebration of white and gold, as you will see. And here is the first image of the chapel with the high altar in the background, and unfortunately it is not all that clear. But the next shots will show the beauty of it in a better way. Here the main nave, again looking towards the main altar. And the wall and ceiling, and here you can see very clearly, the richness and the exuberance of the decoration of this place. And it's also clear that you're not dealing with a small little chapel. From there, we went out into the cathedral square and crossed it to the Regensburg Cathedral, which is one of the most beautiful Gothic cathedrals of Germany, maybe second only to Cologne. And here is an image of the cathedral. Now, the atmosphere of this church is so different from the old chapel. Where the old chapel is like an exuberant prayer meeting, this one is like being caught up in prayer and lifted up into the very presence of God. It is much simpler, much starker, but everything raises your thoughts and your mind up to heaven. Precisely because of the high ceilings and the Gothic arches. Now, this cathedral had not been destroyed or touched by the war, so the windows are still the old windows. And look to the back of the church. And then we went down to the Danube, down the street, and we looked first at the old stone bridge, which you will see in the next slide. And here it is. And this bridge is about 900 years old, and when it was built, it was a very extraordinary feat of engineering to get this bridge across the river. And here you can see that at least at Regensburg, the Danube is really the blue Danube. We didn't stay too long at its edge because the wind coming off the water was super cold. and we were looking for a place to warm up a little bit. But then we took the train back home to Fürth, had Mass and dinner, and were ready for another adventure the next day when we took the train to Rothenburg. And this was in a sense our most complicated trip because we had to change trains in Nuremberg, in Freistadt, and then in Steinach take a bus for the last section of the journey. And here's a photo of some of us in the train. And here Joey and Lulu peeking backwards from their seat. And here a photo of us in the bus going to our final destination, namely Rothenburg. And the bus brought us to the railroad station, and from there we walked to the old city, still surrounded by its wall of defense. Here you see part of our group at a gate with a watchtower in the back, and in the background again you see the city wall. The city wall is in perfect shape. At each tower there are stairs going up, and you can actually go up on top of the wall and walk along it, and if you wished you could walk all around the city. And here you see a picture of the stairs going up to the defense. And if you go up there and you look out, you get a view of the outside world as the soldiers had it who guarded the city in ages past. Here we are looking down into the moat because a moat filled with water surrounded the city and made attacking it more difficult. Then we went in and made our way slowly towards the center of the city. You can see the cobblestones. You see again that the streets are kind of narrow, and the houses, some of them go back to the Renaissance in style, and others even to the Middle Ages. Here is the town hall of Rothenburg and the Christmas market in front of it. We had lunch just opposite that square in front of the town hall. Afterwards, we went to St. James, and we began by walking down this street. On the right side you still see some stalls as a kind of extension of the Christmas market in front of the town hall. As you see from people carrying umbrellas, it's a kind of like a rainy and foggy day. A street scene of Rothenburg. And here again, and one of the things that struck me very much is that every city, irrespective of where you went, was very beautifully decorated for Christmas, giving them a kind of festive air. Here an inside shot of the church. It is wonderful that the town fathers of Rothenburg did not permit the reformers to remove any of the art treasures from the church. And here you see in the next slide a picture of the main altar. It's again one of those where you can close panels to depict different literature, different scenes from the life of our Lord. But the real treasure is a wood-carved altar commemorating the institution of the Eucharist done by Tilman Riemenschneider, the great carver from Würzburg. And he did this altar in the years from 1501 to 1504 as a little tablet. In the next slide we'll show you, and here it is. After we visited the church, we went back to the railroad station, took the bus to Steinach, and then the train to Ansbach in order to meet a group there that had been discovered by Mike Paderon, that are enamored, as it were, by the BCBP and especially by its action groups. And here is the route of the train to Ansbach. And then after we met with them and had dinner with them and shared about the BCBP and they shared about their group, we took the train from Ansbach to Fürth. And the next morning, we went back to Nuremberg and to the Christmas market which had opened just the day before. Again, we used the subway to get there and went out again at St. Lawrence Church. And this time you could see the streets decorated with angels, all leading to the Christmas market. And opposite the St. Lawrence Church, we saw this tower house, a kind of a fortification of an individual family. In the old days, of course, there were no adjacent houses. It was standing by itself, and it was really like a castle within a walled city. Now we made our way down Königstrasse, and here there were so many booths with offerings of sweet and savory delicacies that it was nearly impossible to pass them all by without sampling at least some of it. We again crossed the river and stopped for a little photo op. And finally arrived at that same marketplace. But what a transformation. So many people. It's the oldest and the biggest Christmas market in Germany, and they say that it is visited every year by between 1.5 to 2 million people. In front of the Church of Our Lady they had a stage, and a group from South Tyrol was entertaining the crowd with Christmas music. Now, of course, you get cold on a day like this and you need something to warm yourself up. And all along the street they serve you Glühwein, that is hot mulled wine in mugs. Now, one of the things that you can only get at the Christmas market and is a little figurine made of prunes, figs, and a walnut for a head, as you see it here. Now that evening, we went back to St. Lawrence Church for an organ concert. It was also an experience because the church was super cold, and after an hour we were glad to get outside where it was warmer than inside. And we took the subway back to Fürth and then had dinner in Fürth. The next morning we celebrated Mass, and then it was time to pack up our things and get ready to take the taxis back to the airport that you see here and begin the long flight back home to the Philippines. So we boarded our Lufthansa flight for Frankfurt, which was just about only half an hour, and then we changed planes for the long flight to Hong Kong, and then took a PAL flight from Hong Kong to Manila. And here again you see the animated flight route, and one could only wish that the flight would have been as short as this animation. But after all, we went nearly a half around the world. And then we arrived back at Naya, and after a wonderful week of adventure on the romantic road and at Christmas time in Germany.